Well, welcome to my darkroom, or should I say garage, because that's really what it is. In this video, I'm going to show you around the basic equipment I use to make my darkroom prints, the enlarger, the processing trays, the developers, the washers, etc. Just to give you an idea, a flavour of how it is to work in a traditional darkroom environment. Okay, probably the most important thing about a dark room is making the room dark, surprisingly. Now, I work in a garage which is reasonably dark. However, light will get under the doors. I'd have to wait till it was probably about 10 o'clock at night. So I have rigged up some very cheap curtains, which I purchased from, I think it was Amazon. And what I've done is I've rigged them up so I can draw them whenever I want to work in my darkroom. Now, if it's very bright outside, I will have problems with just one layer because no matter how much you try, and you'll be familiar with this if you've tried to black a room out, you'll get little bits of light coming through. So to alleviate that, I have put a second set in, and effectively there I've got got a dual skin, and that keeps all the light out. Right, well, something which you I'm sure all associate with a darkroom is the red light, the infamous red light. You must have seen it on dozens of films, usually creepy ones with a guy in a dark room. But the red light is there for a purpose. Let me just put this back on for a second. The red light is there for a purpose. Now, the paper is not sensitive to this red wavelength of light. That means we can work in a red light environment, so we can see what we're doing. We can actually work with the enlarger, the timer, the paper. We're not in total darkness. Now, that's not the case if you're using colour paper. If you're using colour paper, you have to be in total darkness. It's very, very difficult to do. Now, the wavelength of this light is designed to not fog the paper, but I would advise, if you do take up darkroom printing, to do a test whereby you expose some paper on a table to the red lights for probably 10 minutes, and just to see if it actually fogs. Normally you lay coins on the paper, and what happens is the coins will actually leave little white circles, obviously, as the rest of the paper gets fogged by your safe lights. Now, they are called safe lights for a reason, because they are safe to work under. But yeah, part of the fun, I think, as well, is being in this, I don't know, it's quite an atmospheric environment. I absolutely love it. Right, well, now we have our dark room, we have a working space to do our enlarging. We must move on to probably the most important piece of equipment, which is the enlarger itself. Now, the enlarger is just a light box. It's a lamp up here, and there's a lens at the bottom. You shine the light through the lens and it projects an image onto the paper. So it's the reverse of the process which happened with the negative. The negative was exposed to light when you were shooting the film, and now you're exposing the negative light by projecting it through it. Now, the enlargers vary tremendously, and I'm not even going to start to go through the various types. Suffice to say, it is quite a basic piece of equipment and probably hasn't changed in about 130 or more years. Very, very simple to operate as well. So let's have a closer look at some of the controls. Okay, so in the enlarger here we have what's known as the negative carrier. Now, obviously this carries the negative, so I'll just load, if I can show you, bear with me a second. Take our negative out of the sleeve, and we place the negative onto the negative carrier upside down, because things get reversed obviously with a light source and an enlarger, just like they do with a camera, but obviously your mirror flips it back for you with your DSLR. Okay, so I'm just lining up now the negative in the negative carrier in there. Okay, I'm going to slide that back in under the enlarger head. So I have the lens, which is sat down here, 50mm lens. You actually use the same focal length as you normally would for that particular film format, 50mm standard for full frame. So we're now going to go on and set up the timer and look at how we make the exposure. So this is my timer. Now, this is an f-stop timer, and I don't intend to go into the details of this now. I'll make a separate video on the difference between linear and f-stop timers. Now, this allows me to set the amount of time which I expose the piece of paper for. Okay, so I can set it up in increments of a quarter of a stop or half a stop or whatever. If you have a normal analog one, you just turn the dial. Now, the point of this is that once I set this up, I can then start the exposure and it will expose the image for the amount of time I've set in there, because each negative will require a different amount of time, and for dodging and burning operations you'll need to set these in increments. Maybe, you know, if you're burning in half a stop, then you need extra time on the clock to do that. But very, very easy with this timer, but as I say, I'll cover that separately. But all it does essentially is turn the light on and turn the light off. Now, once you've exposed your piece of film to light under the Enlarger, it is ready for development. Now, you may be familiar with the traditional form of developing, which is done in trays. Now, there are typically 3 chemicals involved in this process. You have a developer, which obviously develops the image. The image develops in that first tray, usually a couple of minutes for fibre-based, or 3 minutes maybe for some. With resin-coated papers, just a minute. Then it goes into a stop bath. As the name suggests, that stops the development immediately. Now, there's 2 advantages there. One is it helps preserve your fixer, which is the final bath, which fixes the image by washing away the unexposed silver. And secondly, it will stop the development very rapidly, which is important for some processes, which I'll cover in another video. And then it goes into the stop bath, and the stop bath, as I say, dissolves and removes the unexposed parts of the paper. Essentially, so it's fixed, you know, it is then stable in light. Now, if you didn't fix it and you put the lights on in the room, it would quickly darken, because those areas that hadn't been exposed in the Enlarger would be exposed to light and they'd start to rapidly expose themselves. So fixer, couple of minutes, and we have a print which is almost completed. Now, I did say that this is what you may normally see, but I also have another processor. Now, this is a slot processor made by Nova in the UK. I think it's really designed primarily for colour printing. Now, it's temperature controlled. Now, I've had these things for probably about 15 years on and off, and I absolutely love them. This is a 16 by 12 model. Now, what it essentially does is replace the trays, which are, you know, reasonable size, and these are only small trays, by the way. These are only 10 by 8 typically. It replaces the trays with heated slots. Now, I have my developer, my stop bath, and my fixer in here. I also have a spare slot as well for something else if I want to use it for clearing the paper later with a hypo clear. And the nice thing about this is it's very compact. So if you are a bit strapped for space, it may be worth looking out for one of these. They're not cheap, even second hand. You're looking at probably at least £300, but they are invaluable for me particularly. And what I like about it is the chemicals are covered with a little bit of tubing, which keeps the air out, stops oxidation. I can work with these chemicals for a week or 2 before replenishing them. And when I'm finished, because I am a bit of a DIY genius, I have rigged up a nice little cover like that. So it's all out the way, not going to get bashed by anything in the garage, not going to get the cats trying to lick the chemicals, etc. So yeah, I find that particularly useful for my style of developing. Now, it is important that you ensure you have adequate ventilation in the darkroom. There are odours given off from the chemicals. Now, I use odourless chemicals, so there are very few smells in the darkroom. However, I am highly susceptible to darkroom odours, which is one of the reasons I gave up darkroom printing about 7 or 8 years ago. Now, I'm working in a much bigger space, in a garage, but I also have an extractor fan, which is quite simply just an inline extractor which takes the air up through and out of the eaves in the roof above, and the tube I tend to dangle near to the chemicals wherever I'm working, so I have a good draw of air coming off here. It tends to keep the environment more pleasant and easier to work in. Right then, now that we have our image fixed, and by the way, these aren't real chemicals, I wouldn't be touching them with my hands normally, I'd have gloves on. Now we have the image fixed, a very important stage is the washing. Now the washing will remove any residual fixer which is left within the image. Now if that's left in there, it will degrade the image over time. You may have seen old photographs in albums or in junk shops where they've silvered. They get that bronzy look about them. It's sort of the shine when you hold them at a funny angle. That's the image breaking down, and that can be caused by the likes of fixer which is left within the paper. So it's very important that we wash the image fully, the paper, sorry. Now, I have a print washer. This is a automatic print washer. It just basically is a tub of water with a feed going around it, which will gradually, over the period of about an hour for fibre-based prints, remove the fixer from the image. Now, resin prints, which are much easier to work with, probably take 5 minutes, but very important that you actually wash your prints properly if you want them to last. Right, we have developed our image, we have fixed our image, we have washed our image archivally, and we're now going to do the most sophisticated step of all, which is to peg it out on the line to dry. Now, there are various ways you can dry your prints. If they're resin coated, you can give them a squeegee and they'll dry out in a matter of minutes in a warm climate. You can also put them on drying screens. You can clip them back to back. It's quite good actually. You clip 2 prints back to back with pegs, and the curl is naturally compensated for by the print doing the opposite, so they tend to come out quite flat. Either way, you're probably going to have to press them, fibre-based prints, later in some sort of like blotting paper, or you may be lucky and have a glazer or a dryer. I used to have one, stupidly sold it with everything else, and I could actually flatten them and heat them, got a beautiful shine on them as well. So yes, that is our print to hang up to dry. I typically hang to dry overnight, and then I let them dry out within the house because it's a little bit cold in the garage. So yeah, that is the process. It's as simple as that. It's something you can practice and practice at and get better. It's a real craft, this. It's something that I'd highly advise you to give it a go if ever you get the chance. Great fun. Right, well, I hope you enjoyed that quick ramble through my garage and an introduction to my darkroom printing environment. Now, I will be doing more darkroom printing videos in the future once I've worked out how to film them a bit better. Yes, I must admit I've struggled a bit tonight. I need to rig up some cameras and some lights, to be honest, but do hope you found it useful anyway. And I will be doing more in the darkroom, cover some of the items in a bit more detail and go into more specific areas around papers and enlargers, etc. So yes, thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.